Today, what we're gonna do, we are gonna read a teaching from the book. Did everybody download the teaching of the Buddha from the Facebook group? No? Who got it? Can you raise your hand just so I know who got the book? You did, Trumpus? That's all? Okay. So that's a good idea. Actually, it's a foundation in Japan. This book in Japanese is like the 800th edition. It's all the basic teachings of Hinayana and Mahayana. So all the root sutras of the Buddha in an accessible form are packed in this 300 pages little book, and it's available for free in PDF format from the group. But you can also order a hard copy if you want it. The reason I chose this one is because I began my path with this book. It's written in a very accessible language. It's very straightforward. It's not too magical, and I don't want people to get confused in the beginning. So it should do a good job as an introduction to Buddhism. I hope as good a job as it did for me more than 20 years ago. Um, so today I will ask Julia again to read for us, but once you all have the book, I would like to change reader every week. I would like to ask somebody to read a chapter from this book every week. So if you'd like to volunteer, that would be an honor. And today, well, I will just have you, Julia, to please stand and read the today's today's content, please.
That's going to be the chapter 1, Shakyamuni Buddha, the life of the Buddha. The Shakya clansmen dwelt along the Rohini River, which flows among the southern foothills of the Himalayas. Their king, Suddhodana Gautama, established his capital at Kapilavastu, and there had a great castle built and ruled wisely, winning the acclaim of his people. The queen's name was Maya. She was the daughter of the king's uncle, who was also the king of a neighboring district of the same Shakya clan. For 20 years they had no children, but one night Queen Maya had a strange dream, in which she saw a white elephant entering into her womb through the right side of her chest, and she became pregnant. The king and the people looked forward with anticipation to the birth of a royal child. According to their custom, the queen returned to her parents' home for the birth, and on her way, in the beautiful spring sunshine, she took a rest in the Lumbini garden. All about her were ashoka blossoms. In the light, she reached her right arm out to pluck a branch, and as she did so, a prince was born. All expressed their heartfelt delight with the glory of the queen and her princely child. Heaven and earth rejoiced. This memorable day was the 8th day of April. The joy of the king was extreme, and he named the child Siddhartha, which means every wish fulfilled. In the palace of the king, however, delight was followed quickly by sorrow, for after several days the lovely Queen Maya suddenly died. Her younger sister, Mahaprajapati, became the child's foster mother and brought him up with loving care. A hermit called Asita, who lived in the mountains not far away, noticed a radiance about the castle. Interpreting it as a good omen, he came down to the palace and was shown the child. He predicted, "This prince, if he remains in the palace, when grown up, will become a great king and subjugate the whole world. But if he forsakes the court life to embrace a religious life, he will become a Buddha, the savior of the world." At first, The king was pleased to hear this prophecy, but later he started to worry about the possibility of his only son leaving the palace to become a homeless recluse. At the age of 7, the prince began his lessons in the civil and military arts, but his thoughts more naturally tended to other things. One spring day, he went out of the castle with his father. Together they were watching a farmer at his plowing, when he noticed a bird descended to the ground and carried off a small worm which had been turned up by the farmer's plough. He sat down in the shade of a tree and thought about it, whispering to himself, "Alas, do all living creatures kill each other?" The prince, who had lost his mother so soon after his birth, was deeply affected by the tragedy of these little creatures. This spiritual wound deepened day by day as he grew up, like a scar on a young tree. The suffering of human life became more and more deeply ingrained in his mind. The king was increasingly worried as he recalled the hermit's prophecy, and tried in every possible way to cheer the prince and to turn his thoughts in other directions. The king arranged the marriage of the prince at the age of 19 to the princess Yashodhara. She was the daughter of Suprabuddha, the lord of the Daha castle, and a brother of the late Queen Maya. For 10 years, in the different pavilions of spring, autumn, and the rainy season, the prince was immersed in rounds of music, dancing, and pleasure, but always his thoughts returned to the problem of suffering, as he pensively tried to understand the true meaning of human life. The luxuries of the palace, this healthy body, this rejoicing youth, what do they mean to me? He thought. Some day we may be sick, we shall become aged. From death there is no escape. Pride of youth, pride of health, pride of existence, all thoughtful people should cast them aside. A man struggling for existence will naturally look for something of value. There are two ways of looking, a right way and a wrong way. If he looks in the wrong way, he recognizes that sickness, old age, and death are unavoidable, but he seeks the opposite. If he looks in the right way, he recognizes the true nature of sickness, old age, and death, and he searches for meaning in that which transcends all human suffering. In my life of pleasures, I seem to be looking in the wrong way. Thus, the spiritual struggle went on in the mind of the prince until his only child, Rahula, was born when he was 29. This seemed to bring things to a climax, for he then decided to leave the palace and look for the solution of his spiritual unrest in the homeless life of a mendicant. He left the castle one night with only his charioteer, Chandaka, and his favorite horse, the snow-white Antaka. His anguish did not end, and many devils tempted him, saying, "You would do better to return to the castle, for the whole world would soon be yours." But he told the devil that he did not want the whole world. So he shaved his head and turned his steps towards the south, carrying a begging bowl in his hand. The prince first visited the hermit Bhagava and watched his ascetic practices. He then went to Arada, Kalama, and Udrakaramaputra to learn their methods of attaining enlightenment through meditation. But after practicing them for a time, he became convinced that they would not lead him to enlightenment. Finally, he went to the land of Magadha and practiced asceticism in the forest of Uruvilva on the banks of the Nairanjana river, which flows by the Gaya village. The methods of his practice were unbelievably rigorous. He spurred himself on with the thought that no ascetic in the past, none in the present, and none in the future, ever has practiced or ever will practice more earnestly than I do. Still, the prince could not realize his goal. After 6 years in the forest, he gave up the practice of asceticism. He went bathing in the river and accepted a bowl of milk from the hand of Sujata, a maiden who lived in the neighboring village. The 5 companions who had lived with the prince during the 6 years of his ascetic practice were shocked that he should receive milk from the hand of a maiden. They thought him degraded and left. Thus the prince was left alone. He was still weak, but at the risk of losing his life, he attempted yet another period of meditation, saying to himself, "Blood may become exhausted, flesh may decay, bones may fall apart, but I will never leave this place until I find the way to enlightenment." It was an intense and incomparable struggle for him. He was desperate and filled with confusing thoughts. Dark shadows overhung his spirit, and he was beleaguered by all the lures of the devil. Carefully and patiently, he examined them one by one and rejected them all. It was a hard struggle indeed, making his blood run thin, his flesh fall away, and his bones crack. But when the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, the struggle was over, and the prince's mind was as clear and bright as the breaking day. He had at last found the path to enlightenment. It was December 8th, when the prince became a Buddha at 35 years of age. From this time on, the prince was known by different names. Some spoke of him as Buddha, the perfectly enlightened one, Tathagata. Some spoke of him as Shakyamuni, the sage of the Sakya clan. Others called him the world-honored one. He went first to Mrigadava in Varanasi, where the 5 mendicants who had lived with him during the 6 years of his ascetic life were staying. At first they shunned him, but after they had talked with him, they believed in him and became his first followers. He then went on to the Rajagriha castle and won over King Bimbisara, who had always been his friend. From there, he went about the country living on alms and teaching men to accept his way of life. People responded to him as the thirsty seek water and the hungry food. 2 great disciples, Shariputra and Moggallana, and their 2,000 followers came to him. At first, the Buddha's father, King Suddhodana, still inwardly suffering because of his son's decision to leave the palace, remained aloof, but then became his faithful disciple. Mahaprajapati, the Buddha's stepmother, and Princess Yasodhara, his wife, and all the members of the Shakya clan began to follow him. Multitudes of others also became his devoted and faithful followers. For 40 years, the Buddha went about the country preaching and persuading people to follow his way of life. But when he was 80, at Vaisali, and on his way from Rajagriha to Sarasvati, he became ill and predicted that after 3 months he would enter nirvana. Still, he journeyed on until he reached Pava, where he fell seriously ill from some food offered by Tunda, a blacksmith. Eventually, in spite of great pain and weakness, he reached the forest that bordered Kusinagara. Lying between 2 large sala trees, he continued teaching his disciples until his last moment. Thus he entered into perfect tranquility after he had completed his work as the world's greatest teacher. Under the guidance of Ananda, the Buddha's favorite disciple, the body was cremated by his friends in Kusinagara. 7 neighboring rulers, as well as King Ajatasattu, demanded that the relics be divided among them. The people of Kusinagara at first refused, and the dispute even threatened to end in war. But under the advice of a wise man named Drona, the crisis passed, and the relics were divided among the 8 great countries. the ashes of the funeral pyre, and the earthen jar that contained the relics were also given to 2 other rulers to be likewise honored. Thus, 10 great towers commemorating the Buddha were built to enshrine his relics and ashes.
Thank you, Julia. Now my job, now that we know a little bit about the life of Shakyamuni, and as you can see, this is a bit mythical. This is anecdotal. Let's see, it's like a tale, like they have in every religion. And I want to unpack that a little bit, try to bring your attention to the important parts and some of the teachings that are hidden in that story. And in fact, I have prepared some talking points, and I will ask Julia to help me go through them. I know that the first one I wanted to mention the elephant, which is one of the first things that are mentioned in the story, and then as I go, maybe you whisper the order of the bullets so that I don't get lost, please.
Perfect.
All right. But before I start this, I know that most of you, if not all of you, are new to Buddhism, and there are some terms that you will hear oftentimes, such as samsara, such as nirvana, such as enlightenment. So I thought, I would say 3 words about each of them so that we get used to them already, because these are packed words and they're very difficult to understand completely. It's probably a job that will last many months, if not many years, before you get a true sense of what samsara, nirvana, and enlightenment are. But I'll give it a try. So samsara is basically what the cycle of rebirth, and Buddhists believe in reincarnation, and there's a superstitious form of reincarnation, and there is, I would say, a deeper form of reincarnation in the teaching. But think about dying and reincarnating to the moment, which is more on the side of the deeper teaching. So samsara is basically about being stuck in a cycle of suffering. It's about repeating damaging patterns over and over again, and to the point that it's uncontrollable, to the point that you're hurting people, you're hurting yourself, and you would like it to stop, but you can't make it stop, so you are going back over and over again to the same bad habits. It's very close to addiction, like somebody that wants to quit smoking or wants to quit drug but cannot do it. But at another level, it's mental patterns. So this is what samsara is about. Nirvana is basically a pattern-free world. That's the equivalent of paradise in Buddhism, where whatever I'm trying to choose the right word, but like whatever you hope for manifests. And that's because your mind is clear, and you're not stuck in a pattern, you're not stuck in a cycle. So if you want to spare money, then you don't have to feed your addiction, so you will succeed at sparing money. So nirvana is that kind of world where you have more possibilities because your mind has been tamed, is under control, and you are free from most damaging patterns. So nirvana is the aspiration of an enlightened being. There's like there are like steps to this. The first thing is to wake up or open your eyes to your psychological patterns, to your damaging habits. And once they are recognized, you kind of start unprogramming yourself. So the moment of waking up is also a moment like of not coming back. Because once you have seen what you're doing to yourself, what you're doing to others, it kind of takes a life of its own and starts working. And a perfectly enlightened being, you will hear that. You will hear enlightened and you will hear perfectly enlightened. When they speak of the Buddha, they often speak of the perfectly enlightened one. So what does that mean? Simply that they are awake all the time. A perfectly enlightened being is somebody that is awake all the time, so that is always saying where they could lose it and are kind of preventing that to happen. They're aiming and keeping the mind, I don't like the word control, but let's say under control all the time. While when you just refer and say, oh, this guy is enlightened, well, it just means he woke up. He might not be so awake all the time, but he has some notions, and he gained what in Buddhism we call the view. So he has a way of looking at himself and at the world now that the work is being done. So the enlightened person that is perfectly enlightened basically lives in nirvana. The person who has not awakened is called in Buddhism an ignorant. Not understanding the root cause of suffering is called ignorance in Buddhism. So you have the ignorant, which is like junior non-initiate level. You have the awake, who has now the view and has started the work, and you have the perfectly enlightened person who's basically living in his mind, at least on another plane. So these are important central teachings in Buddhism, as they are like milestones on the path of the inner work and outer work that we are doing. And it relates well with the first image of the life of Buddha, which is the elephant that enters the side, that enters the flank of his mother. And the next day she gives birth to what would be either a grand monarch or a great spiritual leader. The reason for that is that elephant and dharma in India is the country of origin of Buddhism, so they have elephants over there. They know the animal well, and they know that an untamed elephant is dangerous. So they liken the untamed mind to a gray, untamed elephant. So what you could go and run through a house if he's startled or kill somebody easily. And then they liken the white elephant to a mind that has been tamed, that is under control. So one is more like the mind of samsara, and the other is the mind of nirvana. And we could also oppose, like, one is the mind of fear. Samsara is the mind of fear, and nirvana is the mind of love. So you have kind of the fearful elephant and the loving elephant, and both don't act the same way. They're not triggered by the same events, obviously. So what entered the body of the mother, she had a vision, in fact, right? It's not like in Christianity where the archangel actually descended, and in Buddhism we're aware that all of that are symbols. So she had a vision that her child would have the qualities of the white elephant. So she had a vision that she would give birth to a child with a clear mind, and that's when that's why the hermit makes the prophecy that this child will be able to be such a great leader because he has his mind under control. Now, what's funny about that prophecy? I think that's my second talking point, Julia.
Prophecy.
Yeah, okay. So the prophecy is kind of funny because it's I think it's relatable and it's very modern. What happens is that you have this father and he receives the hermit, and the hermit says, "Oh, you're gonna have a great son. He's capable of doing everything." And at first, the father is happy about that, but then he thinks again, and he thinks about, oh, he might be a spiritual leader. And I mean, that's like telling a mother parent that you've decided to become a musician, or that you've decided to study philosophy, or why not become an influencer or a professional gamer. Obviously, most parents lose it when they hear that kind of thing, and they get worried. First, they would have loved their son to walk in their footsteps and take care of the kingdom and do the family business, basically. And so that's on one level, and on another level, they would have loved They want Buddha to have a good livelihood. They want him to earn his money well and eat properly and have a great life. So he just acts like a modern parent, saying, "Okay, you're gonna listen to me," and he puts him under a bunch of tutors that are teaching him the art of war, and basically they're teaching him conquest and killing people. But we are here with a child who has just lost his mother, who's very sensitive about death, to the point that when he sees a little worm being killed, being hurt, he feels it very deeply. So you cannot ask a fish to climb a tree. I feel that many parents do that with their kids. They don't necessarily understand who their kids are. They don't necessarily understand what their qualities, their strengths, or their weaknesses are. But they do understand their own path. So we have this tendency to go with what we understand and what makes us secure, and we try to impose that path on our children oftentimes. So that's what he does, and it's a very modern reaction, I would say. What's the next talking point, Julia?
Scar 3.
Okay, there is this beautiful image. I don't know if you've noticed it, but they say that the sensitivity to death, this suffering that he was feeling, grew with him like a scar on the tree. So it deepened and it became ingrained in the tree. I'm from the city of Quebec in Canada, and it's an old battlefield. And if you go to some of the trees on the main the main way, you will find trees that still have cannonballs stuck to them. And these trees are hundreds of years old now, and kind of the wood went around, but the wound is still there. And it's something that my father had taught me when I was a kid walking over there. He said, "See, son, when a tree starts and bends, and something bends it when it's young, it can grow back straight, but this bent will always be there, just like the cannonball." And this in itself, this like three phrases in the story of Buddha, is a teaching about all our mental conditioning work. And it basically also explains what personality disorders are in psychiatry. A personality disorder is a strategy that at some point in your life saved your life because you were surviving, something was happening, or something very, very difficult was happening that you were dealing with. So you kind of program this defense mechanism in you. And now you're years later and the threat does not exist anymore, but you're still reacting the same way. So like borderline personalities, or there are many personality disorders. You can easily look them up, but they are often caused by an old trauma and applying the same strategy. The thing is, just like the tree, if this happened while you were educating yourself, while you were growing up, well, this bent is almost impossible to remove. Psychology, psychiatry will tell you that they have like a 2% success rate in curing people who have personality disorders. That's why they keep them under medication, because it's very difficult to reprogram that part of somebody. It's kind of part of the structure. That's why it's called a personality disorder, because it's part of the structure of the personality of the individual. It's like part of who they are or who they think they are. And Buddhism can help with that because it redefines a lot who you think you are. And although it doesn't solve anything, it can take care of a lot of these problems. But basically, think of it as once you had a raft and you used it to cross a river, and now you're 20 years later and you haven't seen a river in 20 years, but you're still carrying the heavy raft on your back. So you are wasting a lot of energy and you're very tired. And it's like your raft, once a solution for you, is now preventing you from enjoying life and being happy. So you need to drop the raft and carry on. Next point, please.
Renunciation.
Okay, so we have the Buddha who's living in a palace and everything that's conceivable is available to him. And I mean, they're being very polite in the description that they do of his life, but imagine the kind of things that a king does, right? It's all kinds of desires and pulsions satisfied whenever they want. So he goes from this world to questioning: isn't there more to life? And okay, fine, I'm having a lot of fun, but I'm gonna. It is said in Buddhism that there are 3 times when you're absolutely alone and nobody can help you, and they were named in that story, and it is in sickness, old age, and death. And true, right? Nobody can prevent us. Although doctors are trying to do a great job, they cannot prevent us from falling ill. They cannot prevent us from growing old yet, and they cannot prevent us from dying. So these are battles that you need to develop the maturity to fight for yourself. No matter how many friends you have, how much money you have, how many cars you have, it won't make those 3 pills easier to swallow. And so the Buddha realized that very early on. And when that happens, when you start to see that not only you are not preventing suffering in your life, but you may be contributing to it because you are partying. So you go up here in your fun in life, and then sickness can take you down there. So if you go too high and then you go low, like it's a big fall. It's a big fall to take. Um, so in effect, extreme emotions contribute to a feeling of being let down, to a feeling of depression, in a way. It's just because of the interval. So once you realize that, also maybe you stop looking for extreme sensations because you know that after the sun comes the rain, just as true as after the rain comes the sun, right? So if you can avoid getting wet just for fun, why not? Um, so this is called renunciation. When you start to see what is causing your suffering, and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, I don't want to live like that." Um, in my family, and maybe in some of yours, there were things that were always the same, like the 2 sisters or the 2 aunts that were fighting over a lifetime over the same things, and nobody would change, and they just kept it going. Or as I said, addiction. The guy that is always broke because he's not responsible with his money, but he can't help it, so it's not really his fault. And so once you start looking at the world and seeing those patterns around you, and obviously you find them despicable most time, and even worse when you look at your own, then there's this seed that is planted in your heart that say, wow, why am I doing this to myself? It doesn't make sense, and I want to renounce that way of living. That's not my way. I don't want to live like that anymore. So far, so good. All right. Julia, please.
A fighting chance.
Okay. One thing that startled me the first time I read about the Buddha was, I love children, and I had trouble understanding that he would just leave his newborn behind and go do his own thing. And I maybe I still have a little bit of trouble understanding that. But if you put yourself in the entire context, that this guy is a prince, he probably has 25 tutors for his kid. He probably was never meant to raise it himself. There's probably traditional gender roles in India at this time. So he was not really expected at all to be a father, apart from teaching him the art of wars and managing the kingdom's money. I don't think the father played a big role. But still, he could have stayed and played peekaboo for a little while with his kid. He didn't. And one part of this, I think, is to give himself a fighting chance. Of course, if you're trying to quit smoking, you try not to hang in rooms where everybody is smoking and everybody's offering you cigarettes. So if you live in a world of pleasure like he did, and you've seen that this is not the way, that this will make you suffer more eventually, then it's not very smart to stick around. And so, some people delay it. Some people wait for the kids to go away, and some people, like the Buddha did, felt a sense of emergency and felt like he had to change and go away. The story says he was 29. I guess people died earlier because, to me, it feels like midlife crisis. Leaving the wife, leaving the house, leaving the children behind. I don't know if he bought a convertible car and a motorcycle after that, but I wouldn't have trouble believing that he did. There's this stage in life. It's one of the predictable crises of adult life where you basically just want the opposite of what you had. And renunciation starts like this. That's not good renunciation by any means, but it kind of starts like this, where you just, instead of going towards non-desire, you're basically desiring the opposite of what you had until you find out that this is not the answer either. So we see some of that in the Buddhist path. What's next?
Yogic meditation.
Okay. Another point that surprised me is that at one point Buddha goes and he meditates with these guys for a while. And then at one point he raises and he says, yeah, I thought about this, and this meditation will never lead me to enlightenment. And then you think, well, don't all, like every Buddhist, meditate? So what's the deal with that? How come everybody meditates? How come the Buddha himself taught meditation if he's convinced that it's worthless and it won't bring you to enlightenment? So the key word here was said by Julia. The key word here is yogic. A few thousand years ago, yoga was already around. People were already trying to reach enlightenment or all kind of superpowers through meditation. But the meditations that they were practicing were more like breathing techniques that were a little bit extreme. Some variations of the yoga that we know today also, so postures. Although this is a late development, originally yoga had no postures at all involved in it. It was the root of yoga is closer to the root of Buddhism. And so, yeah, they were practicing what they called meditation, but in a sense, it was very different. Now, I'm not saying that their kind of meditation was bad and the one that Buddhists practice is good and one leads to enlightenment and the other doesn't. I think ultimately Buddha was right. Meditation does not lead to enlightenment. Uh, you need to have a bunch of processes going on consciously, unconsciously, and in relationship with the universe for that waking up moment to happen. The Buddhist literature is full of stories of a guy that was thrown a shoe in his face by his master, and that's the moment he woke up. Another woke up after he killed a man. Another woke up after he fell down a mountain. Another was building towers forever. Everybody has kind of his own battle, his own breaking point, because waking up is like your ego breaking up. I often describe it as a phone call from God. Like you've been living a certain way, and then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, this is not right. There's something that I'm not doing right now. So you can fall in a depression, you can fall in a burnout, you can experience all kind of difficult emotional states, and that is the phone call. That is the indication that particular challenge that you're going through, that you are not living right, or that you are not caring for your mind or your heart appropriately. And yeah, so that's what this is. I don't know where I was going with this. I hope there were a few useful words. What's the next point, Julia, please?
Asceticism.
Asceticism. Okay. So, asceticism is basically, I'm just explaining it for those who are not familiar with it, but asceticism is basically self-mortification. It's done in many religions, especially in Orthodox sects, where somewhere a discipline around the thighs. You saw that in the Da Vinci Code. The guy from the Opus Dei, he would hurt himself on the thigh to remember Christ or whatever. Some whip themselves. Kneeling on hard surfaces is kind of a type of asceticism. If you do it 12 hours a day or until your knees bleed. Same thing if you do 3,500 rosaries a day and it's making a groove in your hand. That's all self-mortification. So Buddha hung with that crowd for a while, and when you think about it, these guys, what they are doing, they are trying to transcend suffering. So they say, okay, to become better, faster at transcending suffering, I'm going to make myself suffer. And with the burning feeling that I have, or with the cut that I'm making, or with this nail that is punching my skin, I will work with that sensation and develop the mental fortitude and develop the physical resilience to tolerate those kinds of suffering. But it's just nuts. It's just crazy. Just like you wouldn't drink poison, for breakfast. There is no point in hurting your vehicle, hurting your body. It's like for life, you are bringing death to yourself. So that's kind of what the Buddha realized after a while, that the theory might look good, but you don't have to go to these extremes to become wiser about suffering. And so he opted more for a middle way, which we have not heard about yet because we're just at the beginning of the story. But this is part of the teachings that will unfold as we discuss Buddhism together in the following weeks. Next point.
Determination.
Yeah, one thing that was important though in this whole asceticism episode is when the Buddha says, I may be depleted of my blood, my skin may fall off, I may lose my hair, split my legs, whatever. I am going to attain my goal. I am going to free myself from suffering. I am going to reach nirvana and enlightenment. They say in Buddhism that you should practice Dharma as eagerly as you try to put out your hairs when they're on fire. Right? You don't think about it. You just jump immediately and try to put it out because you know that if you don't stop the fire, it's going to burn and it's going to hurt. And it's close to many body parts that you would rather enjoy. So you want to keep the fire away from them. So it's like the same thing. If Buddhism is a method that stops your suffering, why do you keep on suffering? So it's kind of the Buddha made a decision. He said, no, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm not suffering no more. I am going to put an end to this, and I'm not raising from my cushion until I do, which is the kind of determination that you have when your hairs are on fire. So it just goes to say that Buddhism works for people in direct proportion with the seriousness and the dedication of their practices. I think I really did apply that when I started to study. I remember meditating 20 hours a day. I remember reading the rest of the time, barely sleeping 3 or 4 hours, and I took like 2 years off and immersed myself completely in my Buddhist studies and in my practices. Because I recognized early on the importance and the impact it would have in my life. And so if it speaks to you and you get that, that's good. It's going to do wonders for you. If it doesn't speak to you, well, maybe one day it will, maybe it won't. Maybe you don't need it that much. So it's relative. Depends on how you're dealing right now with your circumstances. And I would say some people are born, educated, or raised wiser than other. I've known people who left their entire life. They wouldn't need a path like Buddhism because they're already masterful at dealing with life and the taking it for its good side. Right? Others, like me, needed a little bit of teachings. So depends on the individual. Next point, please.
8th day of December?
Yes. So it is said that there are two dates in there. You have the 8th of April, and I have no idea what it means, but I know that it's close to the equinox of spring. But the 8th of December, I do know. If you speak with an agricultor, he will tell you that although the shortest day of the year is on the solstice, on the winter solstice around Christmas, around the 21st, well, between the 20th and the 22nd, actually. Although this is the shortest day of the year, he will also tell you that probably around the 8th or the 9th is the day at which the sun sets the earliest. So it's like it's not the shortest day if you consider the time at which the sun rises and sets, but it is the day at which the sun leaves the earth the earliest. So that didn't happen by accident. All of these religions, they have those dates fit with astral events almost always, just like we have Christmas on the solstice. And then, we have Easter, and yeah, they're all aligned with ancient pagan dates. So Buddha attains enlightenment on the day where the sun sets the earliest. And what that means is that from now on, every day that passes, the sun will set later. So the light will grow in Buddha's life. He will become more and more enlightened because he just woke up. So that's just a little fun fact about it. Yes.
Strange friends and family?
Oh yeah. Well, that's kind of a joke, really, because another thing that impressed me about this little story is that Buddha gets under the apple tree, becomes enlightened, and then he goes back and says, "Hey guys, you know what? I was sitting under the apple tree and I realized everything." And he tells them, and they're like, "Oh, God, yeah, you did. You did. Absolutely. Let us follow you." And then he goes to his family, and the family has the same attitude and say, "Let us follow you, Buddha. You're so great." I'm sure if any of us would become enlightened tomorrow morning and we would go back to our friends and families, we would rather put us in a psychiatric hospital than the knowledge that we have found the key, to a perfect happiness and perfect life. They would warn us about collective suicide and stuff like that instead. So I'm just thinking when I hear this part of the story that he must have been good, or they loved him very much and they wanted to motivate him, or he must have been really, really good to have that effect on friends and family because they usually are the hardest on you. And by the way, you do realize that people live through more violence in their own families and with their own friends that they will that people collectively on earth live through wars or other acts of violence. People don't get Most people don't get traumatized because of wars. They get traumatized by small, repeated, often big events, but in the comfort of their own homes. So that's why it's not a path to work with wars either. It's a path to work with the small stuff that amounts to big stuff in the end. Next.
Thirst for teachings.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
The thirst for teachings.
Oh yeah.
Like they would
One
go
thing
if
that
they were hungry or thirsty.
Yeah. So that's something that I think is beautiful is that uh, when he starts teaching, people are drinking it, they are eating it, they want more. So that's something that happens with Buddhism when it strike a chords. You want more. You want more of those tools, of those techniques, and you start having that attitude and going towards the teacher in that way, I guess. Next.
Predicting death. He predicted his
I'm
own
sorry,
death.
what? Yes, okay. So yeah, he says in 3 months I will ascend to nirvana. That's kind of common in Buddhism to predict your own death. There are even Tibetan monks who self-embalm and time their death very accurately. Not only that, there is an entire science of death in Tibetan Buddhism. They have the Tibetan book of the living and of the dying, where they basically tell you what happens before, during, and after death, and how you should behave at every step of the way. They have stories of bringing back people who were clinically dead and practicing a little bit more, and then letting them go. It's a subject that is a big subject, but it's also very allegorical. Um, because death is death. As far as I know, there is no coming back from it, or at least I wouldn't bet my paycheck on this. Um, and I think that these monks and these Buddhist scholars were just very good at observing the small things. Like in a change, just in any change. Let's say you had your favorite cup in the cupboard, and for some reason it slips and you drop it and it breaks. So that's a change, and it's also death. Every change that we go through carries the DNA of death. And if you look at this cycle of how you were attached to your cup and the event that happened to it and how it broke, and if you start paying attention to all of the small changes, if you pay attention to the changes of season, for example, you start being able to predict it. So many things in our lives are cyclic, and in a way, the death of a tree is not unlike the death of a human being. Just through observation and serious contemplation, you can guess what's going to happen to a human by looking at a tree. Um, so that's also one factor, looking deeply. If you are very much in touch with your emotions, with how your body feels, with how your mind feels, I would guess, and I've never been there, but I would guess that a master that has practiced all of his life could, to some level of precision, say, okay, these organs are stopping functioning now. I can tell, and I have about that much time. So it's not as magical as we think it is. Once you get into this habit of observing the world through these lenses, it becomes more and more obvious that it can be done. Next.
Generosity.
Sorry, we missed a bit again.
Post-mortem generosity.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the whole story, and that's going to be the end of my story as well. The whole story of Buddha ends with him dying and being cremated, and then they split the relics. But the reason they split the relics is basically for peace. They're using it for political purpose and to forge an alliance between these realms. And that's something that is very common in Buddhism, to use your death as your last act of generosity. Um, in Tibet, actually, they don't cremate your body. They quarter your body in pieces and they throw it to the vultures on Vulture Peak. So your last gesture of generosity in this world is to feed Trumpers. Don't you look at me like that with your with that avatar. So your last gesture is to feed the birds with your body, which is, I think, I would say it's the equivalent right now as giving your organs, being an organ donor. When you die, you're trying to do something good when your consciousness has left. So, yes, that's it for me. In conclusion, I think what I want everybody to realize is that Buddha is not he's not a god, he's not a superman, he doesn't have any superpower. He's just a guy who lost his mother, who was hurt very early on, who lived experiences that were very extreme, from extreme riches to extreme poverty, and from being cloistered to being out in the world and asceticism, and then being cared for and all of this. So through all that, he saw clearly, and he said, "Oh, the common denominator in all of those situations, what's creating suffering in all these situations. I think I have found what it is, and I think that if we work that way with it, we can cut suffering short." And we're about to see that recipe in our next teachings. But for now, Buddha is a guy. He was enlightened, so he received the title the Buddha, the Enlightened One. And I hope if that is a path for you, we all become Buddhas. Okay. Thank you for your attention, hearing me speak that long. I appreciate it. And now I would just like to hear you guys. What is there a part of these stories that spoke to you? What do you remember? How did you like it? Tell me whatever crosses your mind about this little session. Okay, so let's go in order. Accomplice maybe.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking about what you were just talking about, like death and giving something after your death. So, like a Buddha or someone that gets enlightened has to necessarily like give something to someone or to the world, like to get to nirvana or to be enlightened. Like, for example, if there's like a person that lives completely alone, could he achieve like enlightenment without like giving something to people or to the world? I don't know if I'm clear.
Yes, and it is a very interesting and a very packed question and answer. I won't be able to tell you everything that went in my mind right now because that would be an entire session. But there is a notion of selflessness. Well, first, in traditional Hinduism, there was a notion of an arat. An arat was like a Buddha, but not quite a Buddha. An arat was like a guy that got enlightened for himself. It's like, I'll call that selfish enlightenment. It's like the hermit's enlightenment. I don't suffer. I'm good here. Don't bother me. Leave me alone, and I'll be fine. Leave me alone in my cave. So, is it possible to attain bliss for yourself if you live alone? Definitely. The problem with this approach is basically you are not training. You have stopped your training long ago. The moment you retired to that cave, you have stopped being confronted with new circumstances in the world. So your emotions, your heart is drying out, your mind is drying. You won't be as quick, as smart, as sensitive as you were before. You will mostly be startled by whatever falls upon you. Imagine you're in your cave and a group of tourists arrive and they're all very noisy, and if you miss the company, maybe you will welcome them for tea and really enjoy that. But some others would basically get the shotgun and chase them away too. So you have this notion of being enlightened just for yourself that you are not practicing anymore. So, and that's the Hinayana path, which is the first turning of the wheel. That's kind of the original teaching of the Buddha. But then, just like the scriptures in Christianity, you have many apocryphas, and they added layers with time. So here came Mahayana, or the second turning of the wheel. And there's something I must say here. For example, in Christianity, it's like just a very lucky few wrote the Bible, and that's it, or the gospel. In Buddhism, that's not how it works. In Buddhism, everybody that's becoming a Buddha can write a new chapter of the Bible. So texts are being created today. In a way, if some parts of what I'm saying is true right now and is connected to the source appropriately, I am creating new Dharma for you today. I am enriching the Dharma culture today because I have my vision, my take, my angle on it. Right. So the Mahayana came into existence when a new Buddha appeared in the world, which was a very, very good teacher. And he basically said, okay, so the way we were doing things before, that's fine, but there is like a better enlightenment. And the better enlightenment is to care for others. And it's about selflessness. Because I have understood that in me, the only thing that can suffer is the self. It is my ego that is suffering. So if I can live in such a way that I'm not hitting a wall with my ego, if I can live in such a way that my ego becomes very flexible, very agile and everything, then nothing can hurt me. So then this Mahayana path, which is about bodhicitta or compassion and what they call loving kindness also, is kind of that superior enlightenment where you vow that I will remain, although I could go in my cave and enjoy my pleasure alone in the music that I like, I will remain in the world. I will keep on practicing myself, and I will communicate the tools and the things that I found out to others so that they can have a better life as well, which is not possible if I'm in my cave. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you.
Okay. About you, Palabonbon, I love saying your name, I must say.
It was good, it was good. But is there just like one path to enlightenment which is just being selfless and considerate and giving to others and stuff?
Are you asking if there is one part of enlightenment?
One pathway to enlightenment which is just being selfless.
Oh boy. Actually, enlightenment and waking up, almost as far as I know, almost always happen with an ego breakdown. Okay, no matter if you get enlightened through Theoism or Christianity, or look in Christianity, for example, they have the martyrs, or they have saints that did great acts of selflessness, like Francis the Assisi. I don't know what's his name in English, but I think you get it. And many other saints who would just care for others in incredible circumstances and do those selfless acts. So, and that's how they get their hallow. That's how they get beatified, because they were recognized as people who were absolutely not egoistic. They were absolutely people who were selfless. And so but before you can be completely selfless, then you need to get your ego out of the way, and usually it's suffering that does that. So either you went through a depression. We have a guy in Quebec. They call him the street nurse. He had a difficult episode, tried to hang himself, it didn't work, and then when he was on the hospital bed, something clicked, and he said, "Oh my, other people are living through that. I gotta help them." And to me, this guy is enlightened, and he's been helping people for free at home for like 40 years now, caring for them, like a Mother Teresa type of figure. So she's another one. You see that? Look at any tradition. Look at Gandhi. Look at any saints from any tradition, and you will always kind of find that selfless component. At least those that we know. Those that were in caves, we never heard of them and how enlightened they were. But those that we know, they were working with people and they were helping people. So yes, I would say in conclusion that to be selfless, to be generous, to give a lot of who you are is one of the main conditions to reach enlightenment and to wake up. Does that answer the question well, or did I misunderstand?
Yeah.
Okay. Julia?
Do we go for the meditation or the dedication?
No. I want to ask you if something caught your ear and in everything that was spoken.
I really like the question that Bon posed, and I thought about it differently, but I will think
Please.
more about it before I tell you. Not today.
Oh, you sure you don't want to risk it?
Yeah.
Okay. And hi, Tacos. I saw you walking in. How are you?
Hello, sorry. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't really have questions, but I would say that I really like the analogy of the raft and crossing the river, because that gave me a new perspective on like how we can deal with our own mental problems and challenges, and how our mind can sometimes illusion us that we're okay, but we're actually not.
Yeah. Good. Good. Thank you. And I was wondering, did somebody in this room invite you, or did I invite you, or?
Yeah, I saw your post and like
Oh,
I chatted
wonderful.
you, I think. Yeah.
Okay, it's all right. Sometimes I don't recognize the avatars' names. That's mostly
Yeah,
what's
it's
going
okay.
on, I guess. All right. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it, and I think from week after week we're gonna have more and more people